Nice to meet you too.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, why did you want to be a part of this project in the first place? What attracted you to the staircase?
Well, um, not to it's a great story for one, but it was a job to be had in the southeast, which uh it was something to audition for. But uh it's it was the role was so great, the story is so compelling. And I'd seen the documentary, and all the voices in that story are so particular. uh and yeah, I was so it was just I was drawn to it. It was something that I was familiar with, having grown up in North Carolina. I was very familiar with the case. um I'd seen, I'd I hadn't watched the documentary until shortly before I auditioned for it, but I remembered the case. I remembered reading about it and seeing it on TV. And um yeah, but once I saw the documentary, I was like, wow, yeah, this is gonna be something cool. And then uh, just news of who all was joining the cast started coming to light, and that was also exciting, considering everyone who was involved.
For sure. So, you mentioned I had read that you're from North Carolina. I don't think you were living in North Carolina at the time. I think you were already in LA.
No,
Were
I'm in South Carolina.
Okay, awesome. So, how was it like hearing about the case when it was actually happening?
It was, I mean, it was sensational. It was sort of like it was the OJ for the East Coast. I mean, it was there were just so many kind of explosive finds throughout this case, and it went on and on and on and on. So it was just it was interesting. And I was I was no longer living in Winston-Salem. Once I'd moved to Wilmington, North Carolina by the time this was occurring. So it wasn't quite as immediate. I grew up in Winston-Salem, which is right there near Durham and the Research Triangle. Um, but it's interesting, since the show's come out, or since I've shot it, so many of my North Carolina friends have come out of the woodwork saying, that their parents worked at Nortel with Kathleen. They'd gone to dinners at their house. Somebody's mom were yeah, like good friends of mine, who knew the Petersons, and who knew Jim Hardin's family. One of my theater buddies from Wilmington was like, that he said that he had seen one of Jim Hardin's daughters in a musical, back in Durham, I think, and just had a big crush on her, and she was one of the reasons he followed theater. Anyway, just all these like little stories. It was just such an immediate thing for so many people.
And speaking of being an actor from the Southeast, and a lot of your resume is on shows based in film there, how
Mhm.
is it like to kind of have that little hub of Hollywood there and to act within North Carolina and the Southeast area in general?
It's been amazing. I've never left the Southeast. So, uh, and I started my family here, well, in Wilmington. So to be able to work kind of in your own backyard is not a bad thing. It's been great. Yeah, and it originally, I think, had some limitations. I think there's a stigma that came to southeastern actors. We would kind of get the roles that would trickle down to us after everything else had been cast in LA or New York. But that's kind of dissipated as more and more work has come here to Atlanta, to New Orleans. Now it's coming back to Wilmington, North Carolina. Um, and it's become just such a huge hub. I think Georgia 2 years ago was like number one in film production in the country, film and television production. So that stigma of kind of the local yokel is dissipating, and as that's happening, more and more substantial roles are available to people who live down here, and I think that's great. We've just got some of the best crews in the business. I mean, really, the on the production side, it's just a lot of really talented people down here, and it's been fun to just watch that grow. So yeah, it's been great. It's given me kind of my resume. I don't think would be anywhere near this as substantive as it is had I fled to LA or gone to New York. I think I would have gotten lost in the shuffle. And this being down here, I think allowed me to grow at a good pace.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Jim Hardin role, since there was so much information about the case, there's a documentary, all of this stuff, how did you dive into researching for the role?
I read articles. I watched the documentary. I watched hours and hours and hours of court TV footage. I mean, and watched interviews with Jim. And then once Parker and I got together, Parker Posey, who plays Freda Black, once we got together and talked about it, she arranged a Zoom call with Jim Hardin, and he gave us about 2 hours of his time. Was really generous and forthcoming, and that was such a key part, just getting to have an easy conversation with him, because when you're looking at somebody in a courtroom or in a press conference, it's very different than when you're just sitting down and talking to someone. And so you get to, it's not there's nothing put on about it when you're just in a conversation with them. So that was sort of what I did. I just I wanted to lean into being as Jim Hardin as I could be. He's just such a specific voice, and I think truly a good guy, just all about justice. And yeah.
How did you, obviously you're from the area, but I don't think that's naturally your accent. How did you nail down his accent without it sounding kind of like a caricature?
The same thing, I think, just in speaking to him, and it's kind of in my wheelhouse, coming from down there, growing up in Winston-Salem, and I went to school with people whose parents spoke like that. I mean, so when you're around it, it's easy to kind of to settle into it. But then I'm just kind of I've always been a little bit of a mimic. If I hear something, I can grab onto it and do it. But you're right. It's to not be a caricature. There is a fine line that you don't want to, you don't want to be a caricature. You want to be, I don't know. I don't know how to describe avoiding falling off that cliff into caricature land. Antonio was great. I'd check in with him after takes sometimes. Our director, Antonio Campos, was brilliant and kind and insightful. Just knows how to speak the language of actors and bring out truths, and it's really cool. But I would check in with him. I was like, was that too? Am I too blah blah blah? And he was like, no, we got it. And sometimes he would say, hey, try to find a warmer tone, try to find a different pace in that scene. And he was good about keeping me on my toes.
Parker Posey is one of kind of your main scene partner within the show. How was it like working with her?
I love her. It was amazing. I've always admired her work. Not always. Since I was aware of her work, I've admired her and found her hilarious and deep and warm, and so just multi-dimensional with all of her characters, and just so getting to work with her was just a dream come true. That was awesome, and we clicked immediately. We were like long lost siblings. I think we share we have similar senses of humor, and So we had a lot of fun between on the set and off. It was just really cool. And she was brilliant. I mean, she was just so devoted to bringing Freda to life, and she was also someone who, you know, I think we were a good balance for each other, because Fred is such a big character in life that I know Parker was also walking that tightrope, trying not to fall off into caricature too, and she never did. So it was great. I mean, and considering the dark subject of what we were doing, to have someone that fun and full of light was great and necessary.
Perfect. And I just had one last question with you. Why do you think people have such an obsession with true crime in this case in particular?
Uh, that's still a mystery to me, but I mean, everybody is, we're all complicated. We all, you know, I think even the most plain and true person has something under the surface, and that is theirs, and that that they may not, that they don't share with the world. So you get a story like this where things are, where, you know, it's the onions being peeled constantly. You're like, oh, now this, now this, now this. It's more than sensationalism. It's I think people also looking at these lives that are, you know, that we can all look at these lives as strange, or, you know, anomalous or whatever. But I think also for people, it's a good mirror to go, huh, well, maybe I'm not so screwed, you know, maybe I'm not so screwed up after all. I mean, it's just so complicated. There is a sensationalist factor, and the entertainment, it's easy to say it's entertainment, you know, but at the core of it, there's, you know, there's a life lost, and there's lives ruined in there. And I mean, so just to see, you know, how deep that, you know, that line of cause and effect goes, in all these different lives, I think it's compelling. It's naturally compelling for people. All those things.
Yes, for sure.
That's yeah.
So thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to me, and I can't
Absolutely.
wait for the new episode to premiere this Thursday.
Same. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.